We're going to talk about fundamentalism today in class, and I want to take just a couple of minutes to kind of set the stage. So my goals for this are 1, to give a quick and dirty overview about what fundamentalism is and how it got started. 2, talk at a really high level about the roles of women within the movement. 3, introduce a few women who are kind of in the middle of this evangelical movement. And 4, along the way, talk about what's happening in the world and in the US that are affecting this. And I want to do all of this in less than 10 minutes. So I'm going to be painting with some broad strokes, and in the interest of time, there's probably not going to be a lot of nuance in here. And let me begin with a confession. I'm not a fundamentalist in any sense of the word. On paper, I was raised United Methodist. In reality, it was probably closer to evangelical and fundamental, though not entirely. And based on my experience, I've got some pretty negative biases. A personal goal of mine in this is to appreciate the evangelical and fundamentalist movements, because as I'm beginning my research, I don't see a lot of positives in it. And so I'm hoping to use this opportunity that I've been given. And so with that, synchronize your watches. Here we go.
Let's go, girls.
In the mid-1800s, Charles Darwin was working on and publishing his theory of evolution. Now, there are several granddaddies of Christian fundamentalism, and one of my favorites is a pastor named John Nelson Darby. He was also in the mid-1800s, and he fell off of his horse and suffered horrific injuries that left him bedridden for months. It was while he was healing from head injuries that he began interpreting the Bible literally, and he was really the creator of pre-tribulation rapture. These are things that are kind of planting the seeds of fundamentalism. Did you know, fun fact, fundamentalism is really a little over 100 years old. It's kind of a baby in the world of religion. Also, the Scopes monkey trial is just a little under 100 years old. That's not an accident. Nothing's happening in a vacuum. It's a push and pull, a pendulum swing. When the world zigs, we zag. So what do fundamentalists believe? Well, there are 5 fundamentals of fundamentalism, and there's a series of essays in the early 20th century called, wait for it, the Fundamentals, and they lay these out. These are, firstly, biblical inerrancy. This means no mistakes. By miraculous control, the Bible was an absolute transcript of God's mind, the dictated inspiration of the entire Bible, a book dropped out of heaven. So the Bible is the ultimate authority in matters of faith. Secondly, the virgin birth of Jesus. Thirdly, substitutionary atonement. So that's the doctrine that says that Jesus' death on the cross was a sacrifice for humanity's sin, and it offers redemption and reconciliation with God. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Fourthly, the bodily resurrection of Jesus. And lastly, the imminent second coming of Jesus. This one relates back to that granddaddy, Darby. Remember him and his pre-tribulation rapture? The Left Behind series. Kirk Cameron, my first celebrity crush. His entire adult career, all of that can be attributed to those seeds planted in the mid-1800s. The role of women in fundamentalist Christianity is often shaped by a strict interpretation of biblical text, and these emphasize traditional gender roles. Women typically are encouraged to focus on domestic responsibilities, like being wives, mothers, caretakers, and the men are seen as spiritual leaders. So this perspective is rooted in passages like Ephesians 5:22 through 24, which speaks of wives submitting to their husbands, and 1 Timothy 2:11 through 12, which restricts women from teaching or holding authority over men in a church setting. Fundamentalism also has traditionally excluded women from formal leadership roles. Now, we're going to talk about this in class later today, so I'm not going to talk about it here because we're going to discuss it at length later. That being said, I didn't want to overlook it entirely. Let's talk about a few women in the center of this in the 20th century. The irony is not lost on me that roles for women are limited here, but there are some powerhouse women kind of propelling this movement forward. One of them is Amy Semple McPherson. Now, she had intended to be a missionary alongside her husband in Asia, and this is a more acceptable role for women, but shortly after arriving, she got pregnant and her husband died of malaria. So pretty quickly, she came home a young widow and a single mother. She remarried and she tried to settle quietly into domesticity, but she found it didn't suit her very well at all. Now, I'm probably the only person in this class who's not received a calling, but I hear it's a pretty impossible thing to ignore. And so I think that you all can sympathize with what Amy was feeling, trying to sit quietly at home and adjust to a life that is just not the one that she was supposed to be living. So with $100 and a tambourine, she moved to Los Angeles and became Pentecostal, a tradition where women were allowed to preach, and she began an evangelical ministry there. Her Foursquare church movement took the world by storm in the 1920s. The sweetheart of the silent majority was Phyllis Schlaffly. She embodied the conservative values that many evangelical Protestant women felt were aligned with their faith. She wasn't even a fundamentalist. Phyllis Schlaffly was Catholic, but she was famously against the Equal Rights Amendment, arguing that women liked to be housewives and homemakers. And she said that offering women employment was nothing to strive for because women would rather cuddle a baby than a typewriter. Schlaffly wrote a political book in 1977 called The Power of the Positive Woman. 4 years later, she republished the book titled The Power of the Christian Woman for her growing evangelical demographic. The text of the book was virtually unchanged, other than changing the word positive and changing it for the word Christian, and she peppered in a few Bible verses here and there. Marabel Morgan may be my personal favorite in this cast of characters, but let's take a quick look at some headlines. In 1963, Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique is published. This book highlights the dissatisfaction of some women that were confined to traditional roles, and it sparked some discussion and activism. In 1964, Title IX of the Civil Rights Act prohibited discrimination based on gender. And the ERA was passed in Congress in 1972. Now, it wasn't ratified by the states, but every single day, it was a segment on the nightly news. And the landmark Supreme Court case, Roe v. Wade, that was held in 1973. So religion doesn't just exist over here on its own in a vacuum. When they zig, we zag. Fundamentalists saw their traditional world crumbling around them. And women may very well be dissatisfied at home, as Friedan suggested. But Marabel Morgan gave evangelical women the zag that they felt may have been more fitting to them than the one Friedan suggested. She published The Total Woman in 1972. It was available in Christian bookstores nationwide, and it sold millions of copies. So in this, she offers Christian women a model of femininity that they weren't seeing in the secular world. And it was invested really in defending traditional womanhood against that kind of feminine that was challenged. So Morgan taught them to play the cards that they were dealt and for wives to submit to their husbands at all time. To begin with, she said it's important for women to, it is on page 113, to keep up their curb appeal, to look and smell delicious at all times, and to be soft and feminine and touchable. And if you are dumpy or stringy or exhausted, your husband will be sorry he came home. Morgan also was a big believer in costumes. So when your husband opened the door each night after work, it was like opening a surprise package, and he never knew if he was going to come home to a pirate or a pixie or a cowgirl. So pop culture really enjoyed The Total Woman, and Morgan has somehow been credited for recommending that women clothe themselves in nothing but saran wrap.
I have decided to join Feminine Fulfillment. And are you in for a treat?
What? Wait! What is that, saran wrap?
That's right, bucket breath.
What, you can't...
Will you excuse me? Funny teeth? Why, Mr. Greenblatt.
Mrs. Finley, I just returned your lawnmower.
Oh, thank you. Oh, Mr. Greenblatt.
Yes.
She said she wasn't sure how the rumor got started, but she thought it was a great idea. McPherson, Schlaffly, and Morgan used evangelism to champion this mission, that's female submission and fundamentalism, from the pulpit, from the political arena, and from Christian bookstores and ladies' book clubs. So if you hung out here to the end, my goal was to appreciate fundamentalism a bit more after digging in deeper. And I think I'm actually a little more suspicious now. And if this is your faith tradition and you are at peace, then I am so, so, so happy for you, and I wish you nothing but the best. But this looked like it's about more than faith. A caste system has been created with men on top, with white men on top, creating the rules and calling the shots and controlling all the steps. And they're asking or requesting or allowing or demanding, choose the strength of the verb as you will, everybody else to be submissive and to be subservient, because that's what it means to be faithful in the eyes of the Lord. And I don't think that that is inherently manipulative. I don't think that that is inherently manipulative. But if any one of those people in control decides to take advantage of the position that they're in, then they're set up really nicely to do it. Because we've been told that to be good Christians, we should be submissive to him. So a faith that tells me to check my brain at the door, that makes me suspicious. And a belief that says, have faith in that human, that makes me suspicious. So I don't think this is for me. But in consolation, I keep reminding myself that Jesus handpicked Thomas.